Sabbath School Quarterly 2021, Third Quarter, Lesson 12. For Sabbath, September 18. Trust amid a tempest. Memory text, Acts 27, verse 25. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Acts 27, verse 25. Early Writings, page 207. God's special purpose was fulfilled in the journey of Paul upon the sea. He designed that the ship's crew might thus witness the power of God through Paul. Early Writings, page 207. Suggested reading, Acts the Apostles, pages 439 to 445. Sunday, September 12. Chained aboard ship. Question A. What was the scene of Paul's next ordeal? Yet besides Luke, who else was a comfort? Acts 27, verses 1 and 2. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. And entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Acts 27, verses 1 and 2. Colossians 4, verse 10. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, saluteth you, and Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas, touching whom you received commandments. If he come unto you, receive him. Colossians 4, verse 10. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 262. Roman soldiers were held responsible with their own lives for the security of their prisoners, and this had led to the custom of chaining prisoners by the right wrist to the left wrist of soldiers, who relieved each other in turn. Thus not only could the apostle have no movement free, but he was placed in close and constant connection with men of the most uncongenial and absolutely repulsive character. Men who were not only uneducated and unrefined, but who, from the demoralizing influence of their surroundings, had become brutal and degraded. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 262. Acts of the Apostles, pages 439 and 440. Mariners directed their course largely by the position of the sun and stars, and when these did not appear, and there were indications of storm, the owners of vessels were fearful of venturing into the open sea. During a portion of the year, safe navigation was almost impossible. The Apostle Paul was now called upon to endure the trying experiences that would fall to his lot as a prisoner in chains during the long and tedious voyage to Italy. It was from choice that Aristarchus shared Paul's bondage, that he might minister to him in his afflictions. Acts of the Apostles, pages 439 and 440. Monday, September 13. A treacherous voyage. Question A. What reveals the well-deserved confidence Paul soon earned from Julius, who held him in custody on the voyage to Rome? Acts 27, verse 3. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul, and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. Acts 27, verse 3. Acts of the Apostles, page 440. This permission to go to his friends was greatly appreciated by the apostle, who was in feeble health. Question B. How did the voyage go, and what did Paul warn? Acts 27, verses 4 through 10. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, the city of Lycia, and there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us therein. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the winds not suffering us, we sailed under Crete, over against Salmon. And hardly passing it, we came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Acts 24, verses 4 through 10. Acts of the Apostles, pages 440 and 441. The winds were still contrary, and the ship's progress was difficult. At Fair Havens they were compelled to remain for some time, waiting for favoring winds. Winter was approaching rapidly, sailing was now dangerous, and those in charge of the vessel had to give up hope of reaching their destination before the season for travel by sea should be closed for the year. The only question now to be decided was whether to remain at Fair Havens or attempt to reach a more favorable place in which to winter. This question was earnestly discussed and was finally referred by the centurion to Paul, who had won the respect of both sailors and soldiers. The apostle unhesitatingly advised remaining where they were. Acts of the Apostles, pages 440 and 441. Question C. What was finally decided, but with what results? Acts 27, verses 11 through 17. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice, and there to winter, which is in haven of Crete, and lieth toward the south, west, and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind, called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught, and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive, and running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when we had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. Acts 27, verses 11 through 17. Acts of the Apostles, pages 441 and 442. The centurion decided to follow the judgment of the majority. Driven by the tempest, the vessel neared the small island of Clauda, and while under its shelter the sailors made ready for the worst. The lifeboat, their only means of escape in case the ship should founder, was in tow and liable to be dashed in pieces any moment. Their first work was to hoist this boat on board. All possible precautions were then taken to strengthen the ship and prepare it to withstand the tempest. The scant protection afforded by the little island did not avail them long, and soon they were again exposed to the full violence of the storm. Acts of the Apostles, pages 441 and 442. Tuesday, September 14. Hope to the despairing. Question A. Describe the struggles that occurred at sea. Acts 27, verses 18 through 20. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tacking of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Acts 27, verses 18 through 20. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 265. All night the tempest raged, and the ship leaked. The next day, all on board, soldiers, sailors, passengers, and prisoners, united in throwing overboard everything that could be spared. Night came again, but the wind did not abate. The storm-beaten ship, with its shattered mast and rent sails, was tossed hither and thither by the fury of the gale. Every moment it seemed that the groaning timbers must give way as the vessel reeled and quivered under the tempest's shock. The leak rapidly increased, and passengers and crew worked constantly at the pumps. There was not a moment's rest for one on board. A gloomy apathy settled upon the 300 souls, as for 14 days they drifted, helpless and hopeless, under a sunless and starless heaven. They had no means of cooking, no fire could be lighted, the utensils had been washed overboard, and most of the provisions were water-soaked and spoiled. In fact, while their good ship was wrestling with the tempest, and the waves talked with death, no one desired food. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 265. Question B. What did Paul do at this moment, and how could he soon bring hope to all on board? Psalm 55, verse 22. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. Psalm 55, verse 22. Psalm 56, verse 3. What time I am afraid, I will trust thee. Psalm 56, verse 3. Acts 27, verses 21 through 26. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them, and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Acts 27, verses 21 through 26. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 266. While all around were looking only for swift destruction, this man of God, in the serenity of a blameless conscience, was pouring forth his earnest supplications in their behalf. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 266. Acts of the Apostles, page 442. Paul grasped by faith the arm of infinite power, and his heart was stayed upon God. He had no fears for himself. He knew that God would preserve him to witness at Rome for the truth of Christ. But his heart yearned with pity for the poor souls around him, sinful, degraded, and unprepared to die. As he earnestly pleaded with God to spare their lives, it was revealed to him that his prayer was granted. Acts of the Apostles, pages 442. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 266. Physically, the greatest sufferer of them all, Paul had words of hope for the darkest hour, a helping hand in every emergency. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 266. Wednesday, September 15. Imminent danger. Question A. What deceptive ploy did the selfish soldiers begin in an attempt to save only their own lives and not the others? Acts 27, verses 27 through 30. But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded, and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again, and found it 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern, and wished for the day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. Acts 27, verses 27 through 30. Sketches from the Life of Paul, pages 267 and 268. Passengers and crew were now threatened by a new danger of having their ship driven upon some rock-bound coast. They immediately cast out 4 anchors, which was the only thing that could be done. All through the remaining hours of that night they waited, knowing that any moment might be their last. The leak was constantly increasing, and the ship might sink at any time, even if the anchors held. At last, through rain and tempest, the gray light fell upon their haggard and ghastly faces. The outlines of the stormy coast could be dimly seen, but not a single familiar landmark was visible. The selfish heathen soldiers determined to abandon the ship and crew, and save themselves in the boat which they had with so much difficulty hoisted on board. Pretending that they could do something more to secure the safety of the ship, they unloosed the boat and began to lower it into the sea. Sketches from the Life of Paul, pages 267 and 268. Question B. How did Paul disarm their plot that would not have succeeded? Acts 27, verse 31. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, Except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. Acts 27, verse 31. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 268. Had the selfish heathen soldiers succeeded, they would have been dashed in pieces upon the rocks, while all on board would have perished from their inability to handle the sinking vessel. At this moment Paul perceived the base design and averted the danger. With his usual prompt energy and courage he said to the centurion and soldiers, "Except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved." The apostle's faith in God did not waver. He had no doubt concerning his own preservation, but the promise of safety to the crew had been conditional upon their performance of duty. Sketches from the Life of Paul, page 268. Question C. Explain how even now the apostle inspired cheer. Acts 27, verses 32 through 38. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall out. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them to take meat, saying, "This day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you." And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were in all in the ship 260 souls. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. Acts 27, verses 32 through 38. Thursday, September 16. Exactly as foretold. Question A. Describe the final shipwreck. Acts 27, verses 39 through 41. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with the shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves into the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast, and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. Acts 27, verses 39 through 41. Question B. How did God miraculously preserve all on board? Acts 27, verses 42 through 44. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea, and get to land. And the rest, some on boards, and some on broken pieces of the ship, and so it came to pass that they escaped, all safe, to land. Acts 27, verses 42 through 44. Acts of the Apostles, page 445. Paul and the other prisoners were now threatened by a fate more terrible than shipwreck. The soldiers saw that while endeavoring to reach land, it would be impossible for them to keep their prisoners in charge. Every man would have all he could do to save himself. Yet if any of the prisoners were missing, the lives of those who were responsible for them would be forfeited. Hence the soldiers desired to put all the prisoners to death. The Roman law sanctioned this cruel policy, and the plan would have been executed at once, but for him to whom all alike were under deep obligation. Julius the centurion knew that Paul had been instrumental in saving the lives of all on board, and moreover convinced that the Lord was with him, he feared to do him harm. He therefore commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards, some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped, all safe, to land. Acts of the Apostles, page 445. B.C., volume 6, page 1067. When the roll was called, not one was missing. Nearly 300 souls, sailors, soldiers, passengers, and prisoners, stood that stormy November morning upon the shore of that island Melita. And there were some that joined with Paul and his brethren in giving thanks to God, who had preserved their lives and brought them safe to land through the perils of the great deep. B.C., volume 6, page 1067. Friday, September 17. Personal review questions. Question 1. How has God lightened my burdens as he did for Paul in chains? Question 2. How might I be in danger of rejecting an inconvenient warning? Question 3. What can I learn from Paul's care for the heathen aboard ship? Question 4. Why would the selfish plot with the lifeboat never have prospered? Question 5. What should I learn from how Paul's prophecy was exactly fulfilled?